Welcome back to the channel. Forget the sold-out stadiums, the screaming fans, and the flashing lights for just 1 second. Have you ever wondered what really happens when the BTS armor comes off? What raw, unspoken sacrifices and hidden struggles truly bind these 7 megastars into an unbreakable brotherhood? Are you ready to witness the unfiltered tears and shocking confessions that forged their legendary bond behind closed doors? Grab your tissues because we are diving deep into the emotional core of their journey. Can you actually hold back your tears, or will their untold stories break your heart all over again? Let's find out right now.
Number 7. Jin. The shocking confession that almost ended everything. Picture the blinding, kaleidoscopic lights of the 2018 Net Asian Music Awards in Hong Kong, a colossal arena packed to the absolute brim with screaming fans, industry titans, and a palpable, electrifying tension that only the crowning of the Artist of the Year can bring to a breathless crowd. It was supposed to be a night of pure, unadulterated triumph for BTS, a milestone year where they had literally conquered the globe, smashed Billboard records, delivered a historic, widely praised speech at the United Nations, and permanently redefined what it meant to be global pop superstars. But behind the glittering trophies, the multi-million-dollar revenues, and the flawless, synchronized choreography lay a devastating, crushing secret that was slowly tearing them apart from the inside out. When their name was finally called for the ultimate day sign, the grand prize of the night, the atmosphere instantly shifted from wildly celebratory to overwhelmingly heavy. And as the 7 members made their long walk to the stage, the world noticed something was fundamentally different. They weren't just happy, they were entirely broken, thoroughly exhausted, and barely holding it together under the blinding spotlights. J-Hope had already started the cascade of tears, his voice trembling as he confessed how much pressure they had been under. But it was Jin, the oldest member, the self-proclaimed worldwide handsome, and the usually cheerful, stoic, emotional anchor of the group, who stepped up to the microphone and delivered a shattering, heart-wrenching revelation that made time stand absolutely still for millions watching around the world. Can you even begin to fathom the immense, suffocating weight of the world crushing down on your shoulders right at the exact moment you have finally achieved everything you ever dreamed of and fought for? With hot tears streaming down his face, a sight so incredibly rare that it instantly sent shockwaves through the hearts of the audience, Jin choked back a visceral sob and admitted that earlier that year, the mental and physical toll of their unprecedented meteoric fame had become so intensely unbearable that the 7 of them had sat down together and seriously, agonizingly considered disbanding forever. The word disbandment hanging in the air felt like a literal physical blow to the chest, a forbidden, taboo concept in the K-pop industry, especially for a group at the absolute pinnacle of their career. But Jin, bravely stripping away every single layer of idol perfection and corporate polish, laid bare the terrifying, raw reality of their brotherhood for everyone to see. He wasn't speaking as a flawless, unreachable celebrity. He was speaking as an exhausted, loving older brother who had been forced to watch his younger siblings completely fall apart under the microscopic, unforgiving scrutiny of the entire world. The exact moment that dreaded word left his trembling lips, the camera panned directly to V, who completely broke down on stage, his face crumbling into visceral, uncontrollable sobs, his knees buckling under the sheer, devastating weight of the memories of those dark, hopeless days in early 2018, when they truly thought they couldn't take another agonizing step forward. Jungkook, the golden maknae, who historically hates showing any signs of weakness, hid his face deep in his hands, crying freely and openly as he remembered the painful, desperate conversations in the quiet of their dorm, while Jimin rushed over to pull V into a tight, aggressively protective embrace, a desperate physical attempt to shield his soulmate from the overwhelming pain of the past. Even Suga, the rock-solid, fiercely private producer and rapper of the group, was seen discreetly wiping away tears, his usual tough exterior melting away to reveal the terrified young man who just wanted to protect his family from the monstrous machine of fame. This wasn't just a standard award acceptance speech. This was a profoundly intimate, incredibly painful family therapy session broadcasted live to the entire universe. A historical moment where the polished, manufactured illusion of the entertainment industry was completely shattered by the fierce, messy, and fiercely loyal love of 7 boys who had literally survived the darkest trenches together. Jin's confession was so deeply, profoundly moving because he purposefully took the heavy burden of speaking the unspeakable, shielding the younger members from the inevitable backlash of admitting defeat, and instead masterfully turned their darkest, most shameful moment of doubt into a permanent testament of their survival and resilience. Why is it that the brightest lights always cast the absolute darkest shadows? And what does it truly take to look at the people you love most in the world, see their utter physical and mental exhaustion, and offer them the escape route they so desperately need, only to have them cry, hold your hand, and boldly choose to stay and fight the battle all over again? This specific moment right here is the definitive, undeniable proof that BTS is not just a musical act or a highly calculated corporate creation. They are a legitimate family bound by blood, sweat, and a terrifying amount of tears. A brotherhood forged in the relentless fires of global pressure, where they had to actively, painfully choose each other over their own individual sanity. The revelation that the critically acclaimed Love Yourself era, an era wholly defined by uplifting messages of hope, healing, and self-acceptance, was actually born from a period where the artists themselves were experiencing profound, crippling self-doubt and agonizing burnout, adds a completely devastating, beautiful layer of authenticity to their lasting legacy. Jin, standing there so utterly vulnerable, his voice cracking but remarkably resolute, thanked his brothers on live television for finding the inner strength to gather themselves, to hold on for just one more day, one more performance, one more song, and ultimately to choose the team over escaping the beautiful nightmare they had built. As a viewer, intensely watching this raw, unedited display of human vulnerability fundamentally makes you question everything you thought you knew about success and happiness, forcing you to brutally realize that behind every perfectly curated Instagram post, every flawlessly executed high note, and every multi-platinum album, there are real, breathing humans who bleed, cry, and break down exactly like the rest of us.
Number 6. Sugar, the heartbreaking bow on the arena floor that broke us all. Step back into the incredibly nostalgic, highly emotional year of 2016, a monumental, transformative era for BTS where they were just beginning to shatter the seemingly impenetrable glass ceilings of the K-pop industry and taste the undeniable, intoxicating fruits of their relentless, agonizing labor during the legendary The Most Beautiful Moment in Life era, a time that truly defined their youth, their struggles, and their ultimate rebellion against societal expectations. Picture the colossal, legendary Olympic gymnastics arena in Seoul, a massive, imposing venue that serves as a historic rite of passage, a holy grail for any Korean artist, proving they have finally, undeniably made it in the cutthroat music industry, packed to the absolute rafters with thousands of glowing army bombs, creating a breathtaking, synchronized ocean of light in the overwhelming darkness of the massive stadium. For Min Yoongi, known to the world as the fierce, untouchable, Spitfire lead rapper Suga, stepping onto this specific legendary stage was not just a typical career milestone to celebrate with a passing smile. It was the ultimate, blood-soaked victory in a deeply personal, agonizingly lonely war he had been fiercely fighting for years against extreme poverty, severe mental health struggles, and devastatingly his own family's initial, heartbreaking disapproval of his wildest dreams. We all know Sugar's carefully curated persona on and off the stage, the savage, unbothered, brutally honest musical genius who effortlessly produces chart-topping global hits with a famously stoic expression. A man who once sold his own painstakingly created tracks for mere pennies just to buy a cheap bowl of noodles, and walked home for hours in the freezing, unforgiving Daegu winter because he literally couldn't afford a basic bus fare. But behind that impenetrable, icy exterior lay the shattered, desperate heart of a young boy who only ever wanted his parents to look at him and say they were proud of the man he was becoming.
For years, the narrative surrounding Yoongi's pre-debut life was painted in stark, heartbreaking shades of gray, featuring fierce, tear-filled arguments, physically torn-up lyric sheets, and a painful, suffocating lack of understanding from his traditional parents, who were genuinely terrified that the precarious, unpredictable path of music would inevitably lead their son into a life of miserable failure and financial ruin, forcing him to basically choose between his burning, unyielding passion for music and the family he loved so deeply. Imagine the sheer, crushing psychological weight of leaving your childhood home as a teenager, moving to a strange, overwhelming, fast-paced city, starving on a daily basis, permanently dislocating your shoulder in a traumatic delivery motorcycle accident, and desperately hiding that crippling injury just so your agency wouldn't kick you out of the training program, all while secretly battling severe, crippling anxiety and depression without the warm, supportive safety net of your parents' protective embrace. Can you even begin to comprehend the psychological warfare required to push through the physical agony of a ruined shoulder while smiling for cameras, terrified that one wrong move would instantly vaporize the only dream you have left, heavily relying on the other 6 members to keep your head above water when you were secretly drowning? As the awe-inspiring epilogue concert neared its grand emotional climax and the 7 members took their respective turns to express their deep, tearful gratitude to the screaming fans who had fought so hard for them, Sugar's piercing eyes furiously scanned the massive VIP section of the roaring crowd, desperately searching for something or someone in the blinding, overwhelming sea of flashing lights. When his intense, searching gaze finally landed on his parents and his older brother, sitting right there in the audience, actively watching him perform in the very arena they never ever believed he could reach, the invisible, heavy armor that Sugar had meticulously worn for years instantly, spectacularly shattered into a million unfixable pieces right in front of our eyes. Have you ever experienced a moment so overwhelmingly powerful, so deeply rooted in years of silent agony and desperate hope that your legs physically give out beneath you, completely unable to carry the immense gravity of your own reality? In a split second that will forever be burned into the collective memory of every single army watching, the tough, unflappable lead rapper dropped heavily to his knees in the middle of the massive stage, curling his small body into a tight, trembling ball, and completely surrendered to a violent, heart-wrenching breakdown that sent absolute shockwaves of pure, unadulterated emotion through the entire echoing arena. He didn't just cry a few silent tears, he executed a full, traditional Korean deep bow, pressing his face flat against the cold, hard stage floor, his shoulders violently shaking as he sobbed uncontrollably, pouring out years of repressed trauma, agonizing rejection, desperate longing, and final glorious vindication right there for the entire world to witness in real time. This was not a simple shedding of tears for a successful concert. This was the raw, primal release of a deeply tormented artist who had finally, against all conceivable, insurmountable odds, proven his ultimate worth to the very people whose validation he craved more than any platinum record, prestigious award, or Billboard chart position. The deafening roar of the crowd momentarily hushed, quickly replaced by the collective gasping sound of thousands of hearts breaking simultaneously as they watched the strongest, most stoic pillar of BTS completely crumble in the most beautiful, devastating way imaginable, his normally powerful frame looking so impossibly fragile under the harsh stadium spotlights. In this agonizingly vulnerable state, the true, profound essence of BTS's unbreakable family dynamic was immediately put on full, unfiltered display, because within mere seconds of Sugar hitting the ground, Jeon, the group's resident emotional anchor and fiercely protective angel, sprinted across the massive stage without a single fleeting moment of hesitation. Jeon didn't say a word to the crowd, didn't try to forcibly stop the flow of tears, and didn't attempt to awkwardly force Sugar to stand up to maintain a perfect, manufactured idol image for the rolling cameras. He simply knelt down right beside his older brother, gently placed a comforting, deeply empathetic hand on Sugar's shaking back, and silently, staunchly stood guard over him while he completely fell apart, offering a safe, warm physical harbor in the middle of an intense,
blinding emotional hurricane. How absolutely profound and poetic is it that the very boys who became his surrogate makeshift family during the darkest, most terrifying, and loneliest years of his life were the exact ones physically holding him together right at the exact moment he was finally reuniting and reconciling with his biological family. The profound, striking juxtaposition of Yoongi bowing so deeply to his blood relatives while being gently, fiercely comforted by his found family perfectly encapsulates the entire magical essence of BTS. They are the ultimate, unwavering safety net for each other, the loyal brothers who have seen the ugliest, most broken and desperate pieces of one another and fiercely love them even more because of it. Witnessing a man who had famously penned agonizingly raw, unflinching lyrics about his personal battle with social phobia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and his desperate, bloody fight for survival, now openly weeping on a grand stage was a monumental, paradigm-shifting moment that radically humanized him in a way no polished interview ever could, completely obliterating the toxic, manufactured idol image and replacing it with the brutal, beautiful reality of a loving son seeking forgiveness and giving it in return.
Number 5. RM, the crushing weight of the crown, a leader's final breakdown. Fast forward to the glittering, emotionally charged evening of October 29, 2019, a date that will forever remain permanently etched into the beating hearts of millions of fans as the monumental, bittersweet conclusion of the historic, record-breaking Love Yourself, Speak Yourself World Tour, taking place at the colossal, awe-inspiring Seoul Olympic Stadium, where the crisp, cool autumn air was thick with a mesmerizing mixture of triumphant joy and an overwhelming, profound sadness that only comes from saying a long, difficult goodbye to a truly life-changing era. When you closely examine the intricate, delicate ecosystem of BTS, Kim Namjoon, globally known as the fiercely intelligent, fiercely articulate leader RM, has always stood as the unbreakable titanium pillar of the group, the towering, intellectual giant with a staggering IQ of 148 who single-handedly carried the immense, suffocating weight of being the group's primary spokesperson, their lead English translator on terrifying, unfamiliar foreign soil, and the philosophical, poetic soul who miraculously penned the very lyrics that saved countless lives around the entire globe. From the absolute chaotic genesis of BTS, RM was mercilessly subjected to a brutal, relentless barrage of criticism and vicious, unwarranted hate, actively ridiculed by the underground hip-hop community, who cruelly branded him a sellout for daring to become an idol, while simultaneously facing harsh, superficial judgment from the pop industry for not fitting the traditional manufactured beauty standards of a K-pop visual, forcing him to silently swallow an unimaginable amount of venom at such a dangerously young, impressionable age. Can you possibly imagine the terrifying, paralyzing pressure of standing behind a podium at the United Nations General Assembly, representing not just your 6 brothers or your company, but the entire collective voice of a global generation, eloquently urging millions to speak yourself, all while secretly fighting a vicious internal war with your own deeply rooted insecurities and lingering self-doubt? Throughout the exhausting, grueling months of their massive stadium tour, RM was the undisputed stoic anchor, the dependable captain who faithfully steered the ship through chaotic interviews, chaotic press conferences, and the blinding, disorienting whirlwind of unprecedented global superstardom, always ensuring his younger brothers were protected, comfortable, and shining brightly, often at the absolute tragic expense of his own emotional well-being. But on this specific fateful night in Seoul, as the final lingering notes of their set list slowly faded into the cool night sky, and the time finally came for his closing remarks, the heavy, invisible crown of leadership that RM had worn so flawlessly for over 6 years suddenly spectacularly slipped, and the impenetrable, diamond-hard dam of his repressed emotions completely and violently shattered right before the eyes of the entire world.
Standing alone under the piercing, solitary spotlight, gripping the microphone with visibly trembling hands, RM attempted to articulate the profound, philosophical journey of the Love Yourself era, asking the massive crowd if they had finally figured out how to truly love themselves. But as the poignant, heavy words left his mouth, a sudden, powerful wave of raw, unfiltered realization crashed over him, completely knocking the breath from his lungs and bringing the mighty leader to a sudden, heartbreaking halt. In a moment of sheer, devastating vulnerability that instantly sent a collective, agonizing gasp rippling through the massive stadium, RM's voice viciously cracked, his tall, imposing frame hunched over in pure, unadulterated emotional agony, and he began to sob with a profound, earth-shattering intensity that was so painfully rare and incredibly jarring for the fans and his members to witness. This wasn't the polite, aesthetically pleasing crying often seen in the polished entertainment industry. These were the heavy, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs of an exhausted, brilliant young man who was finally, desperately letting go of the massive, crushing burden he had been carrying for nearly a decade, confessing through breathless, tear-soaked gasps that while he had spent years tirelessly teaching the world how to embrace their flaws, he was still painfully, agonizingly struggling to look in the mirror and truly, fully love the man staring back at him. The sheer, terrifying paradox of this situation, that the very architect of the global self-love movement was standing on a glittering stage, violently weeping because he felt he still wasn't entirely capable of practicing what he preached, added a layer of such profound, devastating humanity to his character that it instantly, irrevocably shattered the illusion of the flawless, invincible celebrity idol. What happens to a family when the strongest, most dependable pillar, the one who always offers a broad shoulder to cry on, suddenly crumbles and desperately needs a shoulder himself? The immediate, visceral reaction of the other 6 members was a masterclass in silent, unwavering brotherhood. They didn't immediately rush to smother him or forcibly stop his necessary cathartic release, but rather they stood around him with eyes full of deep, profound understanding, giving their respected leader the sacred, safe space to finally, unapologetically be weak, holding the emotional fort so he could safely fall apart in their presence. Jimin's eyes welled up with sympathetic tears. J-Hope looked on with a heart-wrenching mixture of pride and sorrow. And Jungkook, who has always famously cited RM as the sole inspiring reason he joined the company in the first place, watched his absolute hero openly weep, a poignant, full-circle realization of how much their leader had silently sacrificed to bring them all to this very pinnacle of success. RM's devastatingly honest, tear-drenched confession that he wished there was a better, more profound word than love to express his feelings for the fans and his members transcended the superficial boundaries of language and culture, hitting the deepest, most vulnerable parts of the human soul and forcing every single person watching to brutally confront their own agonizing journey towards self-acceptance. By having the immense, unyielding courage to break down completely and expose his deepest, darkest hypocrisies and insecurities on the largest stage of his life, RM didn't show weakness. He demonstrated the ultimate, most terrifying form of strength, permanently redefining what true leadership looks like by proving that you don't have to be perfectly healed to guide others through the darkest storms. Does it not send literal freezing chills down your spine to realize that the genius mastermind behind BTS's most uplifting anthems had to endure such profound, silent agony just to write the words that would eventually set millions free, making his tears that night not just a personal release, but a beautiful, tragic sacrifice for the emotional salvation of a generation?
Number 4. Jungkook, the shattered golden maknae, a stool of tears. Transport yourself to the massive, electrifying atmosphere of the legendary O2 Arena in London during the brisk, unforgettable autumn of 2018, a highly anticipated, historic stop on the colossal Love Yourself World Tour, where thousands of passionate European fans had literally waited years, counting down the agonizing days, hours, and minutes just to finally breathe the exact same air as their beloved idols. In the intricate, fiercely competitive, and intensely demanding universe of K-pop, Jungkook is universally revered as the absolute, undisputed golden maknae, a living, breathing prodigy who is frustratingly, awe-inspiringly perfect at virtually everything he attempts, possessing a terrifying athletic prowess, a flawless, honey-toned vocal range, and an explosive, aggressively precise dancing ability that completely and undeniably anchors the group's legendary high-octane performances. Since he was merely 15 years old, a painfully shy, wide-eyed teenager who left the quiet, familiar comfort of his hometown of Busan to be essentially raised, molded, and protected by his 6 older members in a cramped, chaotic, and heavily documented dormitory, Jungkook's entire fragile identity has been profoundly, deeply intertwined with his physical ability to deliver absolute, unyielding perfection on the stage, famously pushing his body to the literal point of collapse and relying on hidden oxygen tanks backstage just to ensure the fans get the mesmerizing, otherworldly spectacle they rightfully deserve. But just hours before the blinding stadium lights were scheduled to flash on and the deafening, earth-shaking roar of the London crowd was set to echo through the massive arena, a sudden, devastatingly simple freak accident completely derailed everything they had painstakingly planned. While lightly stretching and warming up in the chaotic, fast-paced backstage area, Jungkook accidentally collided with a piece of heavy floor furniture, violently ripping open his heel in a bloody, incredibly painful injury that immediately required emergency medical attention and tight, restrictive stitches. The final, crushing verdict from the grim-faced medical staff was absolute, strictly non-negotiable, and completely devastating for the fiercely dedicated performer. Under zero circumstances was he allowed to participate in any choreography, strictly confined to a lonely, stationary stool for the entire agonizing duration of the massive concert to prevent his fresh stitches from violently bursting open on stage. Can you even begin to actively fathom the intense, suffocating psychological torment of being the literal beating center of your group's intricate dance formations, only to be suddenly, forcefully sidelined, forced to helplessly watch from the painful, isolating periphery as your 6 exhausted older brothers miraculously scramble to instantly adapt and cover your massive, gaping absence in real time? Years prior, Jungkook had famously, tearfully confessed on national television that he didn't care about the grueling schedules or the lack of sleep, explicitly stating that his only true, agonizing hardship in life was having to helplessly watch his older brothers go through difficult times without being able to fix it for them. Now, trapped on that cruel, immobile stool, the terrifying reality that his own physical weakness was inadvertently causing his precious members to work doubly hard was a psychological burden far too immensely heavy for his young, fiercely loyal heart to carry. As the spectacular, pyrotechnic-filled concert raged on, Jungkook bravely, desperately tried to maintain his bright, signature bunny smile, sitting awkwardly on the edge of his seat, singing his absolute heart out with flawless, angelic precision. But behind his sparkling, doe-like eyes, a massive, uncontrollable storm of dark, festering guilt was violently brewing, viciously eating away at his conscience because he genuinely, deeply felt that he had personally ruined this monumental night for the thousands of fans who had paid their hard-earned money and traveled from across the continent to see a complete 7-member performance.
The absolute, undeniable breaking point finally inevitably arrived during the emotional, poignant encore stage, when the heavy, suffocating realization of his perceived failure became far too immensely painful to suppress, and the invincible golden maknae completely, devastatingly shattered in front of the entire watching world. Unable to hold back the violent, crashing waves of disappointment, profound frustration, and overwhelming self-blame, Jungkook suddenly bowed his head, desperately burying his tear-stained, flushed face deep into a white towel, his broad, muscular shoulders violently shaking as he surrendered to loud, uncontrollable sobs, looking so impossibly small, fragile, and utterly heartbroken on that giant, intimidating stage. This was not just a performer crying over a simple, temporary injury. This was the visceral, agonizing pain of a deeply devoted young man who felt he had personally, severely let down his beloved family, a perfectionist utterly terrified that his unforeseen physical weakness had somehow permanently tarnished the flawless legacy they had all bled to build together. But it is precisely in these intensely dark, agonizing moments of perceived failure that the magical, unbreakable family dynamic of BTS truly, undeniably shines the absolute brightest, because the exact second his older brothers realized their precious youngest was drowning in a dark sea of self-hatred, they completely abandoned their rehearsed stage positions and immediately rushed to his side like a fiercely protective, impenetrable shield. Jeon, always the hyper-empathetic, soft-hearted angel of the group, literally sprinted across the massive stage, wrapping his arms securely around Jungkook in a tight, desperately loving back hug, pressing his face into his younger brother's neck in a beautiful, silent promise that he was absolutely not alone in this agonizing moment of vulnerability. V and Jin, rapidly employing their signature heartwarming chaotic energy, immediately began pulling hilariously exaggerated goofy facial expressions and performing ridiculous over-the-top dance moves right in front of the stool, desperately trying to pull a genuine smile out of the sobbing youngest, actively sacrificing their own cool, charismatic idol images just to momentarily distract him from his suffocating guilt and remind him of the joy they share. RM, the wise, towering leader, gently but firmly placed a reassuring, heavy hand on Jungkook's shoulder, leaning in to whisper words of profound comfort, before later addressing the worried crowd to eloquently remind everyone that they are all beautifully, deeply human, and that unexpected mistakes are merely stepping stones on the long, winding journey of life. This profoundly moving, incredibly intimate display of unconditional brotherly love completely transformed a deeply painful, embarrassing professional crisis into a permanent, glowing testament of their unbreakable bond, forcefully proving to the entire world that BTS is not just a highly synchronized corporate manufactured dance crew, but a living, breathing family who will always flawlessly, instinctively step in to become the sturdy legs of a brother who contemporarily cannot stand on his own. By allowing himself to be so terrifyingly, completely vulnerable, by openly weeping and apologizing for a freak accident he could not possibly control, Jungkook completely shattered the toxic, impossible illusion of constant, robotic perfection, showing his millions of fans that it is perfectly, beautifully acceptable to break down, to feel completely inadequate, and to lean heavily on the people who fiercely love you when the heavy burden of expectation becomes far too much to carry alone. The undeniable, heart-wrenching beauty of that unforgettable London night was not found in the flawless execution of their complex, high-energy choreography, but rather in the breathtaking, raw humanity of 7 young men instinctively swarming their injured, crying youngest brother, completely wrapping him in a warm, impenetrable blanket of affection and forgiveness, and definitively showing us all that the true, immeasurable strength of a family lies not in never falling down, but in fiercely, unconditionally refusing to let each other stay on the ground.
Number 3. Jeon, the haunting echo of a shattered note that revealed his darkest war. Step directly into the suffocating, incredibly tense backstage shadows of the packed Movistar Arena in Santiago, Chile, during the physically brutal, relentlessly demanding 2017 Wings Tour, a monumental globe-trotting era that definitively cemented BTS as a terrifying, unstoppable international phenomenon, but also violently pushed their human bodies and fragile minds to the absolute razor-thin edge of total physical and emotional collapse. In the glittering, highly manufactured, and fiercely judgmental universe of global pop music, Park Jimin is universally revered as an ethereal, dangerously graceful performer, a man who effortlessly moves with the breathtaking, terrifying beauty of a falling angel, possessing a uniquely piercing, honey-sweet countertenor voice and an explosive, aggressively passionate dance style that has literally captivated millions of screaming fans across the entire globe. But beneath this dazzling, otherworldly stage persona, buried deep beneath the flawless makeup, the blinding spotlights, and the incredibly expensive custom-designed designer outfits, lies a deeply insecure, agonizingly brutal perfectionist who has essentially spent his entire professional life fighting a terrifying, silent internal war against his own mind, constantly plagued by a deeply rooted, suffocating fear that he is somehow fundamentally inadequate and utterly undeserving of the immense, record-breaking love he receives from the world. To truly, deeply understand the agonizing gravity and the profound heartbreak of this specific, unforgettable moment, you have to rewind time and painfully acknowledge the dark, highly traumatic history of Jimin's pre-debut trainee days, a terrifying period where he was notoriously, brutally almost kicked out of the final BTS lineup a staggering 8 separate times, constantly told by cold industry executives that his unique contemporary dancing style simply didn't fit the aggressive hip-hop mold they were trying to build, forcing him to survive on a devastatingly dangerous, starvation-level diet while sleeping mere hours a night in a cramped, sweaty practice room just to violently prove his ultimate worth to a company that constantly threatened to leave him behind. Can you even begin to actively comprehend the immense, crushing psychological trauma of constantly living with a sharp, heavy guillotine hanging directly over your neck for years, permanently terrified that one single microscopic mistake will instantly vaporize the only beautiful dream you have ever fought, bled, and nearly starved for? This deeply ingrained, paralyzing fear of failure violently reared its ugly, terrifying head during his agonizingly difficult solo performance of the track Lie, a breathtaking, emotionally exhausting theatrical masterpiece that requires him to execute physically draining, blindfolded acrobatic choreography while simultaneously belting out incredibly high, challenging vocal notes, a near impossible feat that he miraculously executes with seemingly effortless grace night after night on the world's biggest stages. But on this specific, fateful evening in South America, struggling deeply with the extreme altitude, severe physical exhaustion, and a dangerously raw, inflamed throat, a microscopic, almost completely imperceptible crack happened in his voice during a high note, a tiny, fleeting flaw that 99% of the screaming audience absolutely didn't even notice in the chaotic, deafening heat of the adrenaline-fueled moment. However, for a man whose entire fragile identity is rigidly built on the absolute, uncompromising pursuit of pure artistic perfection, that tiny, fleeting vocal mistake echoed in his own mind like a deafening, catastrophic explosion, completely shattering his delicate confidence into a million jagged, unfixable pieces right there on the stage.
When the mesmerizing, dramatic performance finally ended and he descended into the dark, chaotic backstage area, the raw, unfiltered documentary cameras captured a truly heartbreaking, devastatingly intimate scene that instantly brought millions of fans to their knees in uncontrollable, visceral tears. Jimin was entirely detached from reality, his normally bright, infectious energy completely drained, staring blankly and hollowly into the cold distance as he sat heavily in a cheap folding chair, completely wrapping himself in a heavy, suffocating blanket of pure, unadulterated self-hatred. He wasn't throwing a massive diva tantrum or angrily blaming the faulty sound equipment. He was quietly, agonizingly breaking down, his eyes welling up with thick, heavy tears as he quietly confessed to the intrusive cameras that he felt he had completely, unforgivably ruined the massive concert for the loyal fans who had waited years to hear him sing, his voice trembling with a level of profound, echoing disappointment that cut straight to the deepest, most vulnerable core of the human soul. Why is it that the very people who bring the most immense, radiant light into our own lives are so often trapped entirely in the suffocating darkness of their own minds, ruthlessly punishing themselves for not being flawlessly perfect in a world that is inherently beautifully flawed? This agonizing moment of pure, raw vulnerability is precisely where the magical, unbreakable brotherhood of BTS forcefully steps into the spotlight, definitively proving to the universe that they are not just co-workers forced together by a lucrative corporate contract, but a fiercely protective, blood-bonded family who violently refuse to let each other drown in the terrifying depths of their own insecurities. The absolute second the other members realized that their precious, sweet-hearted Jimin was spiraling down into a dark, dangerous pit of despair, they didn't offer empty, superficial platitudes or awkwardly try to force him to smile for the rolling documentary cameras. They immediately swarmed him with a profound, quiet empathy that spoke volumes louder than any stadium microphone ever could, deeply understanding that his tears were not just about a single cracked note, but about years of repressed trauma and an overwhelming, desperate human need to simply be enough. RM, the towering, fiercely intelligent leader, gently approached him in the chaotic backstage rush, crouching down to his eye level, and in a voice filled with an immense, grounding warmth, logically and lovingly dismantled Jimin's agonizing self-doubt, explicitly reminding him that his undeniable artistry is absolutely not defined by a single human mistake, but the breathtaking, passionate emotion he tirelessly pours into every single second of his performance. V, his designated soulmate and best friend since their high school days in Seoul, didn't even need to use words to comfort him. He simply wrapped his arms securely around Jimin's shaking, fragile frame, offering a silent, physical anchor in the middle of a terrifying emotional hurricane, silently communicating that his profound love for his brother is absolutely, unconditionally untethered from his flawless stage execution. Even the stoic, quietly observant Suga was visibly shaken by Jimin's profound distress, offering quiet, deeply sincere words of validation that miraculously cut right through the thick, suffocating fog of Jimin's relentless self-criticism. This devastatingly raw, entirely unedited backstage confession fundamentally shifted the entire global paradigm of how the world views these untouchable megastars, viciously stripping away the shiny, manufactured illusion of K-pop perfection to boldly reveal the immense, agonizing psychological toll of global superstardom, and powerfully forcing every single viewer to look inward and violently question their own toxic, impossible standards of perfection.
Number 2. J-Hope, the secret birthday tape that unleashed a river of tears. Transport your mind entirely back to the incredibly fragile, fiercely uncertain rookie days of early 2014, a drastically different,
almost unrecognizable era when BTS was absolutely nothing more than a scrappy, aggressively underestimated hip-hop group desperately fighting for their literal survival in a brutally saturated, ruthlessly unforgiving K-pop industry that constantly, maliciously threatened to swallow their massive dreams whole and spit them out into permanent obscurity. In the intricate, meticulously balanced ecosystem of this legendary septet, Jungkook, globally adored as the radiant, ever-smiling J-Hope, is universally recognized as the absolute, undisputed sunshine of the group, the impossibly energetic mood maker, and the fiercely strict, terrifyingly precise dance captain who flawlessly anchors their complex choreography with an iron, unwavering discipline. Since the very beginning, he boldly took on the monumental, psychologically suffocating burden of literally becoming his stage name, forcing himself to constantly radiate relentless positivity, infectious laughter, and an unbreakable spirit, often fiercely repressing his own deep, dark personal anxieties just to ensure his 6 brothers never ever felt the crushing weight of despair during their darkest, most impoverished trainee days. To be intentionally named J-Hope is to voluntarily carry the impossibly heavy, agonizing anchor of optimism, to silently swallow your own physical exhaustion so that the younger members don't lose their fragile spirits, and to masterfully mask your terrifying injuries, aching joints, and bleeding feet behind a blinding, joyful smile, so the audience never has to carry the burden of your pain. But to truly, deeply comprehend the absolute, earth-shattering gravity of this specific, unforgettable moment, you must first agonizingly acknowledge the deeply buried, highly traumatic pre-debut secret that almost permanently altered the course of pop music history forever. A terrifying period when the sheer physical exhaustion and profound emotional isolation became so immensely, unbearably heavy that a completely broken, hopeless Hoseok actually packed his meager belongings and made the devastating, heart-wrenching decision to permanently leave the company, essentially abandoning the group right on the precipice of their debut. Can you even begin to actively fathom the sheer apocalyptic terror that violently gripped the remaining members as they helplessly watched their primary source of light preparing to walk out the door forever, prompting a frantic, tear-soaked Jungkook to physically cling to his waist, sobbing uncontrollably and desperately begging his older brother not to leave him behind in the cold, terrifying unknown of Seoul? It was in that exact agonizing crossroad that RM, fiercely stepping into his role as a desperate, highly protective leader, bravely marched straight into the intimidating corporate offices and forcefully, aggressively declared to the powerful agency executives that a BTS without Jungkook was absolutely, fundamentally doomed to fail. A massive, terrifying gamble that ultimately miraculously convinced J-Hope to drop his heavy bags and return to the cramped, sweaty dorm, entirely and solely because of his profound, unconditional trust in the members holding his trembling hands. Fast forward to February 18, 2014, his 20th birthday, where the exhausted, naive rookies were unexpectedly ushered into a small, sterile broadcasting room under the completely false, highly convincing pretense of filming a standard, mundane documentary interview, entirely unaware of the massive emotional ambush that the staff and members had painstakingly orchestrated completely behind his back. As the room plunged into sudden darkness and a small glowing screen dramatically flickered to life, the completely unsuspecting Hoseok watched in mild amusement as his members appeared one by one, delivering chaotic, heartwarming birthday wishes filled with inside jokes. But the atmosphere in the tiny room violently, irreversibly shifted the exact second the screen faded to black and the deeply familiar, incredibly unexpected voice of his father suddenly echoed through the cheap speakers, gently saying, "Son, it's Dad."
The very instant those profoundly heavy, impossibly rare words hit his ears, accompanied by a video of his parents expressing their immense, unconditional love and profound pride for their hard-working son, the impenetrable, cheerful armor that J-Hope had worn so flawlessly for years instantly, spectacularly shattered into a million unfixable pieces right in front of the rolling cameras. The vibrant, smiling dancer completely collapsed into his own hands, surrendering to a violent, heart-wrenching breakdown that sent absolute shockwaves of pure, unadulterated emotion through the cramped, dimly lit room, frantically grabbing a thick jacket to desperately hide his red, tear-drenched face as he poured out years of repressed pre-debut trauma, the agonizing guilt of almost leaving his brothers behind, and the desperate, crushing longing for the physical comfort of his parents, whom he hadn't seen in months due to their brutally inhumane practice schedules. He didn't just shed a few polite, aesthetically pleasing tears. He wept with a profound, visceral intensity, his broad shoulders violently shaking with loud, uncontrollable sobs, showcasing the raw, primal, and incredibly painful release of a young, terrified boy who had essentially sacrificed his entire youth, his physical health, and his psychological well-being to endlessly chase a seemingly impossible, foolish dream, finally hearing the ultimate, sacred validation from the family he loved so deeply. The deafening, tragic beauty of this unforgettable moment immediately triggered a massive chain reaction of profound, empathetic weeping among the other members, vividly displaying the intensely, deeply rooted magical family dynamic that unconditionally binds them together against the harsh realities of the world. Jimin, famously unable to handle the sight of his beloved brothers in pain, immediately buried his face in his hands and started sobbing uncontrollably alongside him, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, heavy emotion radiating from his strict but loving dance teacher. Even the usually stoic, emotionally reserved Jungkook was physically unable to hold back his own heavy tears, silently crying as he watched the very man who he had once desperately begged to stay, now receiving the beautiful, heart-warming love he so fiercely deserved. A poignant, full-circle realization that they had miraculously survived the absolute darkest, most terrifying chapter of their lives by fiercely holding on to each other. Watching J-Hope, the designated emotional pillar who always flawlessly carried the heavy burden of making everyone else smile, utterly and completely fall apart was a monumental, paradigm-shifting moment for the fans, powerfully and definitively shattering the toxic manufactured illusion that idols are emotionless, always happy robots, and offering a brutally honest, deeply empathetic portrait of a vulnerable human being who desperately needed to be held and reassured. Why is it that the very people who possess the magical, otherworldly ability to light up an entire stadium with a single radiant smile are so often hiding the deepest, most profound wells of sorrow, quietly waiting for someone to finally give them permission to safely take off their heavy, glowing mask and simply breathe in the dark? When J-Hope finally managed to shakily lower the jacket from his tear-stained face, his eyes swollen and completely red from the sheer force of his crying, he looked at his 6 brothers with a gaze filled with such immense, overpowering gratitude and fierce loyalty that it permanently cemented their unbreakable bond in the annals of K-pop history.
Number 1. The Tragic Sky Dome Confession, a hidden grief revealed. Step into the overwhelmingly massive, brightly lit expanse of the Gocheck Sky Dome in November of 2016, a historically pivotal, incredibly triumphant period for BTS that would definitively launch them into the absolute stratosphere of global music dominance, a time deeply characterized by the dark, seductive, and record-breaking success of their monumental Blood, Sweat, and Tears era. In the intricate, meticulously curated, and hyper-vigilant world of K-pop, Kim Tae-young, globally adored as the breathtakingly handsome, deeply soulful, and enchantingly eccentric V, is universally recognized as the unpredictable, charismatic heart of the group, a man who effortlessly commands the stage with his deep, velvety baritone voice, his expressive, soul-piercing gaze, and his famous boxy smile that can instantly melt the coldest of hearts. But beneath the dazzling, highly manufactured glitz of the massive comeback stages, behind the flawlessly executed choreography and the dizzying, blinding flash of thousands of press cameras, Taehyung was secretly, agonizingly carrying a soul-crushing, unimaginably heavy burden of private grief that was slowly, violently tearing him apart from the inside out, completely unbeknownst to the millions of fans who meticulously analyzed his every move. To deeply, truly comprehend the profound, earth-shattering gravity of this specific, unforgettable moment, you must first agonizingly acknowledge the deeply rooted, profoundly beautiful backstory of Taehyung's childhood. Unlike many who grew up in the bustling, fast-paced heart of Seoul, young Taehyung was primarily raised by his beloved grandmother in a quiet, rural farming village for over 14 years of his incredibly formative life, essentially making her not just a guardian, but his primary parental figure, his safest emotional harbor, and the absolute, undisputed center of his entire universe. She was the woman who tirelessly fed him, profoundly shaped his gentle, empathetic worldview, and fiercely supported his impossible, terrifying dream of becoming a singer long before the acronym BTS meant absolutely anything to anyone in the world. Tragically, in early September of 2016, right at the exact chaotic moment when BTS was actively traveling for international schedules in the Philippines and heavily preparing for their highly anticipated make-or-break studio album, Wings, Taehyung received the catastrophic, life-altering phone call that completely stopped his world from spinning. His beloved grandmother had suddenly, unexpectedly passed away, leaving a massive, gaping hole in his heart that no amount of platinum records or screaming stadiums could ever possibly fill. Can you even begin to actively fathom the sheer, apocalyptic psychological torment of receiving the absolute worst news of your entire life while trapped in a foreign country, completely surrounded by rolling cameras and strict, unforgiving schedules, fundamentally forbidden from immediately rushing home to mourn the woman who gave you everything? In the agonizing, grueling weeks that heavily followed, as BTS tirelessly promoted blood, sweat, and tears on countless music shows, executing fiercely precise dance moves and flashing brilliant, rehearsed smiles for the national television cameras, Taehyung was forced to essentially split his soul in half, acting the part of a charismatic, untouchable idol while his heart was literally bleeding, violently locked in a dark, suffocating cage of private mourning. During this painfully difficult promotional period, some deeply observant fans and harsh, superficial netizens began to cruelly notice that V's signature radiant energy seemed unusually dimmed, heavily criticizing him on public forums for allegedly looking completely bored, distracted, or unenthusiastic on stage, a deeply unfair, vicious judgment that violently compounded his silent agony because he literally could not speak the devastating truth of his circumstances without breaking the strict, carefully managed illusion of the group's triumphant comeback. But the impenetrable, heavy dam of his repressed emotions finally spectacularly broke during the emotional climax of their monumental third muster global fan meeting at the colossal Sky Dome, an incredibly intimate, deeply sacred space where BTS finally felt safe enough to strip away the thick, protective armor of their idol personas and speak directly, honestly to the thousands of fans who fiercely loved them. Standing entirely alone on the massive extended stage under a single piercing spotlight, gripping the microphone with visibly trembling hands and fighting back thick, heavy tears that were desperately threatening to spill over his flushed cheeks, Taehyung took a deep, shaky breath and bravely, agonizingly confessed the devastating secret he had been violently harboring for 49 agonizing days.
in a voice that sounded so incredibly fragile, broken, and profoundly sorrowful that it instantly sent a collective, heart-wrenching gasp rippling through the massive stadium. He revealed that his grandmother, his absolute everything, had passed away, and that the only desperate wish he had was to proudly shout her name on national television when they won their first massive day song. But she had tragically passed just weeks before she could ever see him hold that triumphant trophy. The exact devastating moment, he tearfully confessed that his grandmother had always excitedly told him she loved seeing him on television, and that he was so profoundly, agonizingly sorry he couldn't show her his ultimate success, the invincible, charismatic V, completely shattered in front of the entire watching world, his face crumbling into visceral, uncontrollable sobs, his shoulders violently shaking as he surrendered to the raw, primal pain of a heavily grieving grandson. This was not just a simple, polite celebrity shedding a tear for the cameras. This was a profoundly intimate, violently painful display of raw, human grief that instantly obliterated the toxic, industry-wide expectation that idols must be emotionless, eternally happy machines, forcefully reminding everyone that behind the dazzling fame and the million-dollar smiles are real, beating hearts that break, bleed, and mourn exactly like the rest of us. The absolute, undeniable beauty of this deeply tragic historical moment immediately manifested in the breathtaking, fiercely protective reaction of his 6 brothers, completely showcasing the magical, unbreakable family dynamic that unconditionally binds them together against the darkest storms of life. Jimin, Taeyoung's designated soulmate and best friend, who had silently, painfully watched his brother suffer in the dark for weeks, immediately sprinted across the massive stage with tears rapidly streaming down his own face, wrapping his arms securely around V in a tight, desperately loving back hug, physically anchoring him to the ground in a beautiful, silent promise that he was absolutely not alone in this terrifying emotional hurricane. Jin, the eldest brother, who famously carries the quiet, heavy burden of watching over the younger members, stepped forward with his own eyes shining with heavy tears, gently placing a comforting arm around Taeyoung and eloquently explaining to the weeping crowd how fiercely difficult it had been for V to silently endure this massive, traumatic loss while smiling through all their exhausting promotional schedules. Even Jungkook, who typically struggles to openly express his deepest emotions, was seen openly, bitterly weeping, deeply shattered by the immense pain radiating from the older brother he loved so fiercely.